Thank you. Glad to be here in Appleton from Tel Aviv, Israel. It's pretty amazing, actually. Did anybody see the presidential debate last night? Suddenly, Barack Obama is the best friend of Israel. And of course, he's patriotic. Also, I don't know if you noticed, but today, President Obama, the Obama campaign, released, finally, after several months of failing to tell us what his plans are, instead, this tactic of Solo-Linsky division, of calling Romney a liar, war on women, you know all the lies. Finally, he's going to tell us exactly what he claims. He's going to tell us the plans for the next 4 years. And actually today, Obama officially released a 20-page PDF copy, PDF file on the internet, and they're going to print about 3.5 million copies, they say, of Obama's specific plans. So I have them here, and we're going to go over together what Obama claims his plans are, and then I'm going to tell you what his real plans are. So that's coming up. I like doing a radio show. I usually tease what's going to happen later. But first, I want to go to my neck of the woods, because Israel, the Middle East, very much in the news in the last week, 2 weeks, actually since September 11th, because of the attack at what is being described as a U.S. consulate in Benghazi. Well, I'm about to tell you information that I think is going to change your perspective, your perception on what happened in Benghazi, first of all. And second, this information will demonstrate to you the absolute danger of an Obama administration. And actually, I think I'm going to tell you, and I've been doing a lot of reporting on this, what might be the Iran-Contra scandal, the fast and furious scandal of the Obama administration in the Middle East. Now let's start with the basics. And does everybody know what I'm talking about, the 9/11 attack at the U.S. consulate in Benghazi? Very few people know anything about what really is going on there. Number one, if you read any news media report, you watch CNN, read the New York Times, the most basic understanding is that our consulate was attacked. That's very basic. Do a Google News search, you'll see thousands of news articles saying that an American consulate in Benghazi was attacked. Let me read to you, because I have it here, I pulled it up, the exact definition of what a consulate is, and you'll understand why exactly what was attacked is very significant. So a consulate refers to the building that houses a consul. That's very basic. The consul is the official representative of one government to another government. Well, the thing is that the U.S. consul in Benghazi operates out of the U.S. Embassy in Tripoli. Further, go on the State Department website, you'll see that there is no consulate, there never has been in the history of the United States, in Benghazi. So if it wasn't a consulate, what was it? What was attacked on 9/11, and exactly who attacked us? That's first. Then second, we have these claims that Obama immediately used and fed into of protests that took place outside of the consulate, popular protests about a Muhammad film that nobody ever heard of. Turns out, number one, there were no protests. The video surveillance from the CIA, the State Department, the military has now shown this. Number two, who knew about the Muhammad film in the first place to come and protest? And yet we had a president who, for a week, went on an apology tour, even sent advertisements to Pakistan apologizing for a Muhammad film for protests that never actually took place. So what's going on here? Well, let me tell you that I spoke with Middle Eastern security officials who told me about this so-called consulate. And if you notice, by the way, that in Obama's official statements, he never, and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, all of the official U.S. statements about what happened, they don't refer to the building as a consulate. It's called a mission. So why am I sitting here focusing on this building, this very abstract building, by the way? If you've seen the photos of the building that was attacked, doesn't exactly look like a very public building, number one. And number two, it doesn't look like an American diplomatic establishment. I've traveled around the world, so I've seen the different U.S. embassies and consulates in different countries. In Tel Aviv, for example. And the United States we always have the most beautiful embassy, the most beautiful consulate. That building, if you've seen it, it was like a 3-room building that was leased to somebody in Libya. That was no consulate. So, what was it then, and why am I dwelling on it? Well, I spoke with Middle Eastern security officials who told me that what was going on inside of this building was Chris Stevens, the ambassador who was murdered, other U.S. officials were using the building to meet with Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, to plan support for the insurgencies in the Middle East. In other words, support for the rebels. I love that word rebel that the media uses. Rebels are good, they're the good guys. Well, actually, the problem here is that the rebels openly include Al-Qaeda. In fact, the rebel leader is a member of an Al-Qaeda affiliate organization. NATO admitted when we first went into Libya that, yeah, there may be some Al-Qaeda members among the rebel ranks that we are arming. So in other words, what I'm describing here, and I can take it further, I spoke with Egyptian and Israeli security officials who told me that Chris Stevens himself was one of the central figures in arming the rebels and coordinating the aid to the rebels that included Al-Qaeda, that included jihadists. So in other words, our government, the Obama administration, has been arming rebels knowing full well that their leadership consists of Al-Qaeda. And we're shocked, we're surprised, we're stunned that Al-Qaeda attacks us in Libya. Where do they get the weapons from to do that? So Obama, in the middle of a campaign, presidential campaign, in which his foreign policy has been blowing up in a major way, obviously he can't afford exactly for the world to know what was going on in that consulate. So he needed to spin another story. He needed another tale. And so first it was the protests, that there was this protest about a Muhammad film, and it was on 9/11. And then it became something else, and then they didn't request security, and then they did request security. Can you imagine if in the middle of a presidential campaign, it comes out in the news media that we were aiding rebels that included Al-Qaeda? That's a huge diplomatic scandal. Now, also very interesting is the news media's involvement in all of this. But has the news media, and I'm only raising some questions here, has the news media been taking their cues from the Obama administration? Now, here's what I'm talking about. For example, 2 days after the Benghazi attacks, where number one, remember, there were no protests. The video footage showed this. Number two, the Muhammad film had nothing to do with anything. So I read a Reuters article. I want to just quote to you from one part of the article. It says that officials and locals watched what began as a protest on Tuesday. Again, this is 2 days after the attack in Benghazi where there was no protest. A protest on Tuesday against a crudely made American film that insults the prophet Muhammad, that then spiraled into violence and a military-style assault on U.S. troops. Now, the Reuters article, that again is reporting on a protest that never took place, goes on and quotes some guy named Hammam. Doesn't give us his last name. Describes Hammam. I'm sure he's the only Hammam in Libya. It's going to be hard to find this guy. He's a 17-year-old student named Hammam who spoke to Reuters on condition of anonymity from the compound outside of the protest. Hammam says, when we heard that there was a film that was insulting the prophet, we, as members of the public, we came to the consulate here to protest and hold a small demonstration. So in other words, who's Hammam? How is Reuters reporting factually on a protest that it then comes out never took place? So I'm just raising questions here. Did Reuters take their information from the White House? Was this political information in order to aid the Obama campaign? I don't know. I can tell you, though, that I myself, as a reporter in the Middle East, I've been in different situations where I was present where other major members of the news media were there at, let's say, an event, and I saw what happened. I watched with my own eyes what took place. And then I was stunned, absolutely stunned, to come back from, let's say, I'll give you a specific example from an event, and then read the news media coverage of absolute lies of something that I personally witnessed. I'll give you a perfect example. I printed it out here. This was the 40th anniversary of Fatah. That would be Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, Yasser Arafat's old group Fatah. Actually, as you may have heard in the introduction, I go in regularly to Gaza, to the West Bank. I have met with many terrorist leaders. On my radio program, actually, Hamas, the chief of Hamas, Mahmoud al-Zahar, has a regular segment on the show where I interview him. So I went in personally to the 40th anniversary of Fatah. Now, take a step back, actually. Fatah, the official party of Yasser Arafat, of Mahmoud Abbas, the United States considers Fatah to be a peace partner, a moderate, even though actually they have a military wing called the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade that is a terrorist group responsible for about half the suicide bombings in Israel in the last 15, 20 years. Well, we arm Fatah. We train Fatah. I know, for example, and I'll name names right here, Allah Sanakra, who's the chief of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade in a place called Nablus. Again, the brigade's responsible for about half the suicide bombings in Israel. Well, he doubles as one of the heads of Fatah's security. He's been trained by us. He's been armed by us. So what I explained to you in Benghazi of arming jihadists, unfortunately, this is not something that is happening only under a Democrat administration. Also, President Bush, unfortunately, did much the same thing with regard to the Palestinian Authority. So anyway, I went to the 40th anniversary of Fatah. You drive into the compound, and actually Yasser Arafat is buried in the parking lot of the compound. No joke. You park your car, and then a few feet after is the area where Yasser Arafat is buried, because they do this deliberately so that it would be his temporary burial place, and eventually they want to bring him to the Temple Mount after they liberate, quote unquote, the state of Israel, and it becomes Palestine, or at least the eastern sections of Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount. So I'm there. I'm at the 40th anniversary of Fatah, and Abbas gets up on stage. And this is 2 weeks, by the way, after the United States gave 3,000 assault rifles to Fatah. He says, I want to quote him exactly. He gets up on stage. Again, I'm there in the audience, and right next to me is a reporter for the Associated Press. Then right next to him is a reporter for the Washington Post. To my left is a reporter from Reuters. Abbas gets up on stage, and he says, do not raise your rifles against your brothers. Instead, raise your rifles against the Israeli occupation. So in other words, he called for Palestinians to raise their rifles against Israeli occupation. And then he went further and said that there should be peace with Hamas. And then later in the talk, he called for negotiations with Israel. Then I get home and I read the AP, Reuters, the Washington Post. Abbas calls for peace at rally. That was the actual title of an AP article. They literally cut his sentence in half. He said, do not raise your rifles against your brothers. And that's where they ended the sentence. They didn't include the next part, raise your rifles against the Israeli occupation. So this is the kind of media, unfortunately, that we're dealing with here. This total distortion and bias and almost conspiracy. I mean, you would think that maybe they would have to all get together afterwards in some ivory tower somewhere and conspire to cut his sentence in half, but I don't think they did. This is the mentality of the news media. Fatah is a peace partner. President Obama is the greatest president in the history of the world, and let's not ask any questions. If he comes to power, if he in 2008 runs on a campaign of fundamentally transforming our country, why doesn't a single reporter ask Obama, well, what do you mean? What do you mean by fundamental transformation? What do you want to transform our country into? And that's just the tip of the iceberg, I think, of questions that need to be asked to the president that aren't, and I'm going to take it a little bit further. Now, speaking of questions, I'm going to be taking questions here, doing a question and answer session, so start thinking of questions about the U.S., about the Middle East, the war on terror, Obama's second-term plans, because it's hard for me to be in front of an audience of people live and not interact with you. I'm so used to being 5,000 miles away in my radio studio where I do a show in my pajamas at 2 in the morning my time on the biggest radio network in America, where if you come back, if you're actually in the studio in New York, it's like a spaceship, and there are like 15, 20 people there doing the live show, but it's just me in Tel Aviv at 2 in the morning. Even if you see me on Fox News, by the way, a lot of times I'm on Fox from the Middle East. You see I'm very well dressed. I've got a suit, a tie. I actually have shorts on underneath. You can't see that. And it's like 2 in the morning in Israel when I'm on Fox News. And I don't have any human interaction in any of these programs where I'm getting out to millions of people, and yet I don't see another person. Even when I'm in the Fox News studio, I show up after it's closed. I get in, and they don't even have a cameraman, by the way, working the camera there. It's amazing. They have a remote camera in New York that, I guess by remote control, by internet, they're even turning the camera. So it's like this alternate reality of me speaking to millions of people, and I'm the only one. So we have to interact. So we're going to get to questions and comments. But I want to get to Obama's second-term plans. What Obama is planning for a second term. Because today, as I said, he officially released this 20-page paper after months and months of refusing to tell anybody what his second-term plans are. And of course, this is perfect for me because I wrote a book, Fool Me Twice, Obama's Second-Term Plans Exposed. And how did I get Obama's second-term plans? Why is it that from 5,000 miles away, when I'm supposed to be reporting on Fatah and Hamas and Benghazi and Islamic Jihad, why am I, the guy, also Trevor Loudon, though, doing an amazing job, but very few of us doing any real investigative reporting into Obama? I mean, in 2008, it was amazing. I was simply doing a web search. The actual story is a bit strange. I don't really have much free time usually to just randomly Google things, but something happened and I had to stay in my studio for an extra hour. I'm sitting there and I'm Googling Barack Obama, and I was doing investigating into somebody named Rashid Khalidi, who's a Palestinian professor at Columbia, pro-PLO, probably worked for the PLO. And I'm Googling Khalidi and Obama, and I come randomly again up to this connection of something called the Woods Fund, and I'm looking at the names in the Woods Fund, and I see Obama. The Woods Fund was a Chicago nonprofit that Obama served as a paid director from the 1990s until 2002. And then right there, he's serving alongside a guy named Bill Ayers. So I thought, wow, Obama is connected to a domestic American terrorist who attempted to bomb the Pentagon. Surely this was reported everywhere. So I did a Google News search. I mean, this is it's a bombshell story. Not one article in the English language on Obama's extensive connections with Bill Ayers. Instead, the journalistas, as they called themselves, that was that email listserv where the journalists were conspiring to investigate Sarah Palin. Was it really her baby? Was it not her baby? Like right now, they're investigating binders of Mitt Romney and Big Bird and Sesame Street. God forbid should they actually look into what new economic fairness means when Obama announces it, or what is going on in Benghazi. So I quickly wrote an article. I wanted to get it out immediately. I called Joseph Farah of WorldNet Daily. I said, we have to put this out now. Obama tied to terrorists. Obama sitting on the board of an organization with Bill Ayers. Normally, when I put this stuff out, my friends in talk radio like Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Mark Levin, Michael Savage, who's one of my best friends, and some others, they talk about it. Fox News talks about it. They put me on, but that's it. That's where it ends. I was surprised when 24 hours later, I'm attacked by no less than CBS News. I was like, whoa. Aaron Klein leading smear campaign against Barack Obama. So I knew right then and there that I hit on something really big. I got him where they didn't want me to get him, Bill Ayers. So if the entire news media can sit there and ignore Obama's extensive radical background, Bill Ayers is, of course, just the tip of the iceberg. I wrote a whole book called The Manchurian President on Obama's ties to communist, socialist, and anti-American extremists. And again, Trevor also has done amazing work on this. Can you imagine what they're not reporting now? So I'm going to tell you what they're not reporting, and that is what he's planning for a second term. So Obama releases this pamphlet yesterday, online today, 3.5 million copies. It's called New Economic Patriotism, a Plan for Jobs and Middle East Security. Well, let's just stop right there. New Economic Patriotism. Why doesn't anybody just Google New Economic Patriotism? Just Google. Why doesn't the media do this? Google New Economic Patriotism. In America, we don't really know what this term means. It's not something very widely held, although actually Dukakis used it in the 1980s. Google it, and it turns out that New Economic Patriotism is very well known in Europe. It means the government takeover of industry, openly. That's what it means. Let me read to you, for example, a Deutsche Bank report from 2006 emphasizing the negative effects of new economic patriotism, or, quote, government takeovers. The study summarized the theoretical arguments against protectionist industrial policy, pointing out that the damage caused to the economy by an active intervention of the government, i.e. new economic patriotism, outweighs any benefits. France is perceived as the home of new economic patriotism. I can go on and on. The French government deliberately pursues a policy aimed at creating national champions by offering, well, this sounds familiar, by offering financial assistance and political support to specific companies. So in other words, Obama's entire 20-page plan has a title that the news media doesn't want to tell you means government takeover of industry. Forward. That's his slogan. His campaign slogan is forward. Did anybody bother to look at the socialist history of forward? The extensive socialist history of forward, which also is, of course, not surprising, the slogan of MSNBC, moving forward. So Obama starts out, a plan for jobs and security. He wants to revive American manufacturing, he says. Obama's policies have helped manufacturing rebound. The president's plan will build on that success, creating 1 million new manufacturing jobs by 2016. That's it. That's all he says. How's he going to do that? Well, let me tell you, because I have the plans. Now, you might be asking, how do I have Obama's second-term plans? Why me? How did I get them? Were they given to me by the Mossad? By the CIA? No, they're all mine. The very progressive groups, the very progressive gang, the very specific groups that planned Obama's first term, that actually wrote parts of, let's say, Obamacare. Trevor was talking about Quinton Young, for example. Well, it's much further. Obamacare was written by something called the Economic Policy Institute, which is a George Soros-funded radical left institute that actually has on their website, as one of their slogans, New Economic Patriotism, by the way. Yeah, it's there. Also, economic fairness as well is there. Why didn't anybody look into economic fairness? We're hearing a lot about that. Fair shot, fair share. Economic fairness also has this long and sordid history of going all the way back to Karl Marx. So anyway, the very same progressive groups that wrote
sections of what became Obamacare, that wrote what became the green stimulus. For example, a progressive group called the Apollo Alliance, where Van Jones serves. Remember Van Jones, the communist founder? Van Jones on the Apollo Alliance helped to write specific plans of what specific pages of the green sections of the stimulus bill. And I can go on and list about a dozen specific progressive groups, like the Center for American Progress. So I figured, well, if they wrote what became Obama's first term in a very specific way, again, they wrote sections of the stimulus, they wrote sections of Obamacare, maybe they're also planning Obama's second term. And I went on, lo and behold, there it is on their website. The plans, hundreds of pages, each one on each specific topic. So I with my co-author, Brenda J. Elliott, a copious researcher, personally went through every single one of those plans. We went through tens of thousands of documents to divine, Fool Me Twice, the book, on Obama's plan. So I can tell you, for example, when he talks about reviving American manufacturing, he actually, number one, wants more government takeovers, but number two, he wants to bring a massive government jobs works program. More government jobs. He wants to actually bring back the FDR's Works Progress Administration, which would be roads and bridges and tunnels, because we know how well, obviously, that worked out in the past. He then goes on in his second-term plans here, and he spells out plans for economic fairness. Everybody will have their fair shot, and the rich will pay the fair share. There's economic class warfare right there. So what does that mean, economic fairness? What are Obama's plans on economic fairness? Well, first, the plans include economic fairness, that the government can come down. It's called paycheck fairness. This is one example of the second-term plans. The government can tell a private company what would be the fair compensation for a particular job. Yeah, that's just the beginning. Next, living wage fairness. The government, this is the plan, will come and, number one, raise the minimum wage. This actually sounds really good. Wow, they're going to raise the minimum wage to meet the basic needs. Now, if anybody knows Marxist doctrine, see if it matches. The basic needs such as housing, food, utilities, transportation, healthcare, and recreation. So again, this actually sounds really good. Obama will come and raise the minimum wage. The problem is, number one, it's been tried before in Baltimore in the 1990s. It was pushed by Acorn. This was a pet project of voter fraud Acorn, and it drove businesses out. The Baltimore economy, as a direct result of bringing living wage, crashed and burned, because who is going to pay for this? That's the larger plan in this socialist utopia that Obama, and I will use that word socialist when it comes to Obama, because I have been studying in a very specific way his first-term strategy, his second-term strategy. It absolutely is socialist. Who is going to pay for this? Let's get to more here. This is very interesting. Obama wants to, he is planning for greening, green manufactured jobs, clean gas, clean oil, clean coal, energy independence. So I found that Obama is actually planning a massive second-term green stimulus, as if the first-term green stimulus did so well. Now, and by the way, the first-term green stimulus to this day still needs to be investigated by the news media. The massive rank corruption that I have found just doing the little investigating that I am, of the Obama cronies who are deeply tied to billions in stimulus. So he's planning a second-term green stimulus, but that's just the start. Next, he's planning a federal green bank. That's right, a federal green bank to fund clean this, clean that, even while the turbine and wind and the alternative industry, energy industry is failing. Even when Solyndra went bankrupt, he wants to bring a federal green bank. He doesn't mention very much about the military in his second-term plans in the 20 or so page document that he released. So what are his plans for the military, and why am I talking about that right after green? It's because actually Obama wants to green the military. Yeah. According to the second-term plans that we have found. Now, also, by the way, Trevor mentioned Leon Panetta and his radical progressive background. Leon Panetta is heavily tied to something called the Institute for Policy Studies, which is the institute that was accused even by the FBI of being a Soviet front, of actually having their lobby used by Soviet agents during the height of the Cold War. This institute got together with the Center for American Progress, which directed President Obama's transition and is heavily tied to the White House, to write a 2010 defense budget that Obama used, a 2011 defense budget that Obama used, 2012 defense budget that he's planning to use, and I got my hands on it. Again, it's on the internet. Reuters can get it. The Associated Press can get it. Well, they want to transform the U.S. military into, and this is their words, a social work style organization designed to combat global warming, fight global poverty, remedy injustice. We know what that means, of course. The injustice is the United States. It's Israel. It's our allies. Bolster the United Nations and increase peacekeeping forces worldwide. Now, we have very specific slashes to the second-term military on all levels, and I'm not going to bore you with the details. I have about 15 pages of defense slashes to the Army, to the Navy, to very specific submarines, to the missile development program. I mean, after all, who needs a missile development program? Iran's only building nuclear capabilities. North Korea, why should we develop our missiles further? And I can go on and on with the military slashes that will shock you. But what is to be done with all of the savings? Why? They want to invest it in the green scheme, in a second-term green stimulus, in greening the military, and actually not only having the military fight global warming, but to literally green the military, to force the military into specific changes that would green different departments. And they already tried this in the first term. You may have heard that the Obama White House demanded that the Navy buy a certain kind of biofuel at about 4 times the price of normal biofuel. And then it turns out, actually, that the company that is selling the Navy the biofuel is tied to several Obama czars. But they plan much more of this in a second term. Now, also missing from the 20-page booklet on Obama's second term is anything to do with amnesty, with immigration reform, they like to call it. So I'll tell you what Obama's specific plans are for amnesty. And it's very sneaky, actually, very sneaky. Number one, he plans during a second term to push amnesty through a series of executive orders. And I have the executive orders as recommended to him by the progressive groups. First, they would define a vulnerable population. Anybody who fits the vulnerable population cannot be deported. Let me read to you the definition. Individuals, this is their phraseology, who provide physical, financial, or other direct support to their to their minor children, parents, or other dependents. That's every illegal alien living inside the United States right now. It gets worse. Vulnerable population, again, they can't be touched. They will get de facto amnesty. Individuals who have been determined, this is their phraseology, by a medically trained professional to have a medical or health need. End of definition. What does that mean? A hung toenail? Medical need? Health need? I have health needs. We all have health needs. Next. Progressive, any population that fits, now this is a new thing. So first we have vulnerable population. Next we have community-based or faith-based organizations. What does that mean? Let me read to you what they mean by this. Any illegal, what they call them undocumented persons, in the premise or in the immediate vicinity of a child care provider, a school, a legal service provider, a federal court, a court proceeding, an administrative proceeding, a funeral home, a cemetery. So in other words, if you're about to be caught, although actually you already fit the other definitions probably, so they're not going to catch you, but just run to a cemetery, run to a school, run to a church. Now, while Obama is planning a massive second-term amnesty, he also plans to bring in more immigrants legally by raising the caps on visas, unrestricted visas according to the plans, green cards, H-1B visas. If that's not all bad enough, and when I say bad, I have nothing against immigrants. Of course, my family 5 generations ago immigrated legally to the United States. This is an immigrant country over the decades, over the centuries. But number one, they came here illegally. Number two, who is going to pay for all of this? Now, well, we know the answer. While he has a second-term amnesty plan, they also want to disarm border agents in a very specific way. Yeah, that's right, and I have these specific plans here, and it is scary. First, they want to minimize the capability of U.S. border agents to conduct searches. How are they going to do this? By creating a border communities liaison office in every sector, and there are 9 border sectors along, for example, the U.S.-Mexico border. In this office, the liaison office is required to consult with border communities every single time before an operation. Now, these border communities are known to also help, some of them at least, they have some businesses that help these smugglers from Mexico. So if they're going to be informed, that will be very interesting. Next, let's say they do apprehend illegals. If you were paying attention to Sheriff Joe Arpaio, the case there, and he's another good friend of mine, he comes on the program all the time, I believe very strongly that the racial profiling case against Arpaio was a test afloat to see how many people, to see the kind of resistance for this kind of a strategy, and by strategy I mean that in a very specific way, because Obama's second-term plans include mandating the collection of ethnic data on border searches to determine the existence or absence of racial profiling. Now, wait a minute. If a bunch of Mexicans are coming in from Mexico, and the data shows that Mexicans are being stopped, and then this goes to the Eric Holder Justice Department, that's racial profiling. So there are plans to restrict the border agents' ability to even do their jobs. Now, I know we're kind of running out of time, so I want to get to the quick question and answer session, but I do want to mention Obamacare. Why isn't Obama running on Obamacare if it was so great? Why don't we have these Reagan-esque Morning in America ads about his green stimulus, about Obamacare? Now, in his second-term plans, Obama does mention, of course, he says, putting you in charge of your health care. Health care costs were skyrocketing, and families were denied care. So President Obama passed a landmark law, blah, 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 nothing specific. That's it. That's what he mentions here. He doesn't say what he wants to do during the second term on Obamacare. Well, we have very specific, progressive second-term recommendations to use Obamacare as just the start, to nudge, but this would probably not be accomplished during a second Obama term. It would take about a decade. But the plan is to nudge closer and closer toward eventually being a single-payer system. Now, again, I don't know that he can get away with that during a second term. He will very likely get away with this executive amnesty and the slashes to the military and the green scheme and other things, but the plan is to nudge closer toward a single-payer system. Now, I want to take some questions, if anybody has. Well, you stood up, so go for it.
This man, or any people like him,
Was the ultimate purpose of this man doing what he intends to do, according to your thesis here?
Yeah, a lot of people think that Obama hates America. I actually don't think he hates America. What I think is that he hates the America we are now. He wants to transform America. If you look at his entire foreign policy, for example, it makes absolutely no sense unless you look at it from the lens of Obama attempting to minimize America as a superpower status. I mean, why is it? If you were watching all of the debates, Obama constantly talks about cutting the military, and he's proud of this, about cutting the military budget at least. Of all of the departments, of all of the sections of the government to cut in order to save some money, and we really need to do this, we are at an economic emergency. The military must be the last, the final, not the first. So any president that would start with cutting the military budget already has an ideology that is, I would say, anti-American in that America is a capitalist free enterprise. I believe Obama loves the America that we could become, and that is a socialist utopia. He sees America as ripe for eventually becoming the very kinds of countries and the ideology that Eastern Europe is now running away from. So my ultimate, I don't really have a thesis. I can't tell you what's in Obama's mind. You look at his church of 20-something years, anti-American, anti-patriotic. I mean, I went through the Trinity United Church's newsletters of something like 10 years, and I posted a lot of articles that got linked on Drudge, where they slammed patriotic holidays. They allowed Hamas to reprint terrorist manifestos in this church newsletter where Obama was interviewed multiple times, so don't tell me he didn't know about it. So I do think that he sees America as the kind of as ripe for eventually becoming a socialist utopia, of becoming a welfare state. And we're getting very close, by the way. We're like 46% there, according to some statistics. And if during a second Obama term, he pushes amnesty, and he also has many other plans pushing for more unionization. The unions, SEIU, AFL-CIO, Trevor was talking about them. When you combine that with the newly documented illegals, undocumented workers who eventually would vote, to all of the people who now are on welfare, to all of the people who are going to be put on some sort of direct government dependence during a second Obama term, we have a progressive nation. And that's what he wants. It's a stealth strategy that Obama has very little to do with. Obama is the vehicle. He didn't write Obamacare. He didn't write the green stimulus. He did not write almost anything of his enterprising first-term agenda. He's not writing a second-term agenda. Obama's not the bad guy here, by the way. He is a bad guy. But you have a stealth socialist ideology by these progressive groups. They're behind this. If you unmask the progressive gang behind Obama, you'll unmask the true enemies of the United States. Oh, they gave, sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to ask this question. I'm going to assume and ask you to assume that Romney will be our next president. And the question then is this: if Romney is elected, what do you expect to see current President Obama, the left, and the Communist Party to do?
Actually, I think the first part of that question should really be, what do I expect Romney to do? He's certainly talking the right talk with him standing up and I applaud him for the U.S. military, for our country, first of all. I mean, who would ever think we would come to the point where Mitt Romney needs to actually promote American exceptionalism as if this is foreign? After 4 years of Obama, it is. So Romney's talking the right talk. I do hope that he walks the right walk once he becomes president. I mean, it was President Bush who increased the deficit exponentially with massive spending. Then Obama took it to levels unprecedented in American history. In a lot of Romney's talks and his debates, the one thing I'm not hearing, but maybe this is deliberate, and I think that he understands that if he says this, he would get into a lot of trouble, so maybe he isn't, but why isn't he telling us which government agencies he would cut? He has said a lot about his economic plans, but I haven't heard scaling back on the massive government bureaucracy. And also when it comes to foreign policy, I do have some issues with what Romney has said. For example, in the foreign policy debate, and in the previous debate, he called for a Palestinian state. I mean, that at this point in time, when the Palestinians have been so thoroughly unmasked as wanting jihad, as wanting to destroy the state of Israel, they have a strategic plan that they announce. Although I don't fully blame him, because the Israeli government itself still kind of pushes this two-state solution. So there's Romney. Now, the question that you asked was about the progressive gang. They won't go away. Where were they during the Bush administration? They were plotting to eventually come back whenever. They'll wait. They've been waiting for 100 years. This has been going on since, well, you can go to Fabian socialism. You can go to Michael Harrington, who came up with the brilliant idea that Americans don't want to hear about socialism. They don't like that word. So phrase it in a different way. And that eventually became, well, the Democrat Socialists of America, which morphed into the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which was actually founded by the Democrat Socialists of America that Trevor was talking about. So the progressive gang is very patient. They'll wait, and they'll continue to push legislation should the Democrats at any point control the House. They'll wait for 4 years after Romney, for 8 years after Romney, and that's why I keep saying, pay attention to the wizard behind the curtain, the progressive gang. They have a microphone, so actually he'll pass it around. There's like Sophie's Choice here. I can't pick.
Going to usher in the New World Order. Is that what this is about?
If you mean, I actually think that we're seeing, if you want to talk in those terms of New World Order, of that in a way being ushered in right now. Look at the Middle East as an example, perfect example. Obama abandons our ally Mubarak in Egypt, although Romney actually said during the foreign policy debate that he would do the same thing, but I don't think Romney knows very much about foreign policy. Who was waiting in the wings the entire time? It was the Muslim Brotherhood. I went on Fox News at the beginning of the insurgency in Egypt, and I remember warning, but it wasn't warning, it was more reporting, because it was obvious that this would happen. The Muslim Brotherhood was the largest and most organized party in Egypt, that this would happen, and I went up against a Democrat, and he was calling me a fearmongerer. I like that term. I am a fearmongerer. I want all of you to be afraid, because you should be. So you look at the Middle East so swiftly changing to the direction of the Muslim Brotherhood. not just from there, but also a Muslim Brotherhood infiltration here in the United States. You may have heard of Huma Abedin, Hillary Clinton's chief of staff, who is heavily tied. Her family, her mother is a member of the Muslim Sisterhood. Her father is a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. The North American Islamic Trust, CARE, the Council of American Islamic Relations, ISNA, Islamic Society of North America, Muslim Student Association. But the question was about New World Order. Yeah, I see the world, the axes throughout the world shifting so quickly. I mean, we're seeing an earthquake of evil. And if Obama gets a second term, if he was able to do this during a first term, can you imagine what the world is going to look like in 4 more years as America teeters on the brink, because we will be at economic collapse if he pushes his amnesty plans coupled with the massive coming spending, and then our military is minimized, and then Iran, God forbid, should get a nuclear capability, Muslim Brotherhood in charge in the Middle East. But I think that the progressives are playing a dangerous game. A lot of people ask me, is Obama a secret Muslim? I don't know. Although I do know he went to a Black Liberation Theology church, and Black Liberation Theology is not Christianity. It's closer to Nation of Islam. I don't know if Obama is Muslim or not. He did certainly spend a lot of time in Indonesia as a child, but we can't hold that against him. He was a kid. But what I do know is he's empowering radical Islam around the world, but I don't know necessarily whether his end ultimately is for radical Islam to be in power, or you have something else going on here which is very interesting, and that is the progressive gang, the George Soros-funded gang, they have one ultimate goal, and that is a one-world government. That's what they want. This is open. This sounds like conspiracy. That's what they want. The Soros gang wants a one-world government. Well, look at where the Middle East is heading right now, because you had all of these individual countries that were ruled by clans, that were installed by the British and the French a long time ago. Syria, Egypt, Jordan, the Gaza Strip, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Libya. Why would Obama empower Al-Qaeda? Why would he empower the Muslim Brotherhood? Well, Gaza right now is ruled by Hamas, which is the Muslim Brotherhood. It neighbors Egypt, which is now ruled by the Muslim Brotherhood. Libya, waiting in the wings, is the Muslim Brotherhood. Syria. Now, Romney also doesn't, I think, understand the Middle East very well, because he called Bashar Assad a butcher and said that he wants to get rid of the president of Syria. No, I don't like the president of Syria. In 2005, he kicked me out of the country. It was on Fox News, and I had to do a broadcast in protest of his government from Jordan. He kicked me out because I was a Jew, actually. It was very interesting. It was ABC Radio tried to get in, and he let the non-Jewish members of ABC Radio in, but he wouldn't let the host, who was Jewish, in the country. But actually, Assad hasn't really been persecuting Christians. He's secular. And Christian persecution is another big story here in the Middle East. Why don't we hear enough about this? That the Muslim Brotherhood that Obama is empowering is quickly murdering, butchering Christians. But I'm painting this map, this picture here of Assad going, the Muslim Brotherhood gets into power. So we see a theme here, and that is one kind of government control in the Middle East, and that's the Muslim Brotherhood. So I think the progressive gang, the one-worlders, the Soros axis, is playing a dangerous game, thinking that they can do business with the Muslim Brotherhood, install them around the Middle East, and then eventually create this sort of Islamic caliphate, but not necessarily because they're Islamic, they, Obama or Soros, but I guess because they, at least Soros and the progressives, see this as the future. One last question.
I have a friend who spent 12 years in Australia, and she sings the praises of socialized medicine the way the Australians have it. I don't know if you know about Australian medical system. Are we simply, with Obamacare, doing it all wrong and the Australians have it right? Or are we heading toward socialized medicine the way Australians practice it, and is she simply missing something, or what's going on here?
I don't know enough about Australian socialized medical system. I also know that there are countries where people call it a socialist system, and it's not exactly. For example, in Israel, people have claimed that the Israeli healthcare system is socialized because the government does have a mandate that everybody needs to buy health insurance, indeed, but beyond that, there isn't much socialization. So I don't really know enough about the Australian healthcare system to answer that part of the question. What I know is that we will not be able to afford the kind of government takeover of our healthcare industry that Obama is planning that the progressives, not Obama, is planning during a second term. And if you look at the kind of choice that Obamacare claims that everybody would have, and what the actual choice really is, and in fact, actually, a progressive activist recently wrote a New York Times opinion piece, and he helped to craft from the Economic Policy Institute what became Obamacare. He foretold rationing. He foretold healthcare rationing here in the United States. He actually said that under Obamacare, it's inevitable, and he helped to craft it. So is that where we're headed? I don't know, but I do know that he fooled us once, and I hope he does not fool us again. And I have the plans in the back. He claims that he put out a 20-page paper with his specific plans. I have his specific plans in 200 pages back there. Fool me twice.
Could I just say a little bit about socialised healthcare?